Noon today, protests early this morning outside an ICE facility in Illinois became very tense as several people were then detained. Tear gas was deployed. The demonstration became contentious.
That is where we have seen many protesters come to an ICE facility, and we want to go out there now live to the very latest with Fox 32 Chicago's Casey Cronus joining us now with a breakdown of what she is seeing.
You know, we haven't heard any information from ICE officials, but, and you know what? We hear some pepper ball.
Shouts in the night, glass shattering, a crowd pressing against the steel fence outside the ICE headquarters in downtown Chicago. Voices chant, "Don't stand there," while car alarms blare and sirens slice through the air. What began as a protest quickly turned into a confrontation. Witnesses describe bottles and rocks hurled toward the entrance, tires slashed on government vehicles. A shirtless man jumped into the chaos, while pepperball rounds hissed across the sidewalk. From nearby rooftops, officers with paintball-style launchers fired markers to push the crowd back. The clash was raw, tense, and relentless. At one point, a woman reached for an officer's mask, tearing at his face shield before being pulled away. Others blocked vehicles, pounding on hoods until agents surged forward.
Several people were dragged inside the building, not the way they expected to enter federal property. By the end of the weekend, ICE confirmed at least 16 arrests tied to the unrest.
This was more than a protest. It was a collision between law enforcement and civil resistance, between the machinery of federal authority and the emotions of the street. Stay tuned as we break down the tactics, the aftermath, and what these images mean for Chicago and for the nation. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to follow every chapter of this unfolding story.
Flashes lit up the night outside Chicago's ICE headquarters. The sound of firecrackers and pepperball rounds mixed with chants and sirens, turning a federal building into a battlefield of noise.
SHIELD teams pushed forward, their lines tight, using metal barricades to carve space between officers and demonstrators. Each step came with risk bottles, rocks, and even small fireworks earthed overhead. The strategy was clear: contain, divide, and disperse before the chaos spread deeper into downtown.
Protesters pressed back with equal determination. Some crouched behind makeshift shields. Others hurled glass and stones toward the fortified entrance.
A few blocked ICE vehicles, flattening tires and pounding hoods, hoping to stall any movement. Cell phones were everywhere, recording every clash, every pepperball burst, every arrest. A woman was seen shoved into a transport van, her arms still raised in protest. Another man limped away after exposure to chemical spray, later admitted to a hospital according to the National Lawyers Guild. The aftermath left scars on both pavement and policy. Tires ripped, vehicles immobilized, at least 2 seized and towed from the street. Emergency crews reported multiple injuries, some from pepperball impacts, others from inhaling chemical agents. Federal officials framed the actions as measured, saying the force was appropriate to the level of violence used against their personnel. In their view, the barricades and dispersal rounds were not escalation but defense. Yet outside observers painted another picture. The National Lawyers Guild accused federal officers of intensifying the conflict by deploying chemical irritants and firing indiscriminately into the crowd. Their report notes several hospital visits and warns that the use of force blurred the line between dispersal and punishment. For supporters, the operation was proof that law enforcement could hold the line against a volatile crowd. For critics, it was a case study in how state power can inflame rather than diffuse tensions. So the images remain: shields against fireworks, pepperball smoke hanging above city streets, and handcuffs closing around wrists. Was this a necessary defense of federal authority, or a moment when the tactics of control deepened the very divides they sought to contain?
Floodlights still glared across the ICE headquarters on Monday morning, but the fight had already shifted from the street to the halls of power.
The images of broken glass and pepperball smoke sparked calls from Washington. Conservative lawmakers demanded stronger measures. One senator went on record suggesting that Chicago could require National Guard deployment if unrest continued. Even the president, in remarks from the White House lawn, warned that federal property will be defended with every tool available. But the suggestion raised the question, if National Guard troops take positions in neighborhoods already hostile to ICE, will their presence calm tensions or ignite them further? That uncertainty echoed through weekend talk shows, where analysts pointed to past deployments that inflamed rather than reduced confrontation. At the same time, state legislatures have begun charting a different course. In California, lawmakers introduced a package that would limit federal agents from wearing masks during arrests near schools and require disclosure of federal presence in certain public settings. Supporters say it's about transparency and protecting children. Federal officials quickly pushed back, declaring that such state rules do not apply to federal law enforcement and hinting at looming constitutional battles. Legal scholars warn of a coming clash over the balance of federal supremacy and state authority, a tug-of-war that could define how immigration enforcement is carried out across the nation. Public opinion, however, remains divided and raw. Supporters of ICE point to the 16 arrests as evidence that the agency protects communities, removing fugitives and enforcing laws that keep neighborhoods secure. At a press conference, one official stated plainly, "This is not about politics, this is about safety." Applause followed in some quarters, where citizens tired of repeated clashes welcomed a firm response. Yet critics see a different picture. Civil rights groups call the operation an assault on free expression, citing hospitalizations from chemical exposure as proof of disproportionate force. In interviews outside Chicago's South Side, community members spoke of generational trauma, families separated, children living with the fear of a knock on the door, the memory of past raids lingering. One activist said, "When you treat people as enemies, don't be surprised when the streets react." Voices from Black and Latino neighborhoods cut deeper still. They recall histories of over-policing, redlining, and fractured trust. For many, the ICE headquarters standoff was not just about immigration policy, but about decades of exclusion and systemic inequality. Their resistance, they argue, is rooted not in lawlessness, but in lived experience. And so the narrative splits. To some, ICE is the shield of law. To others, it is a symbol of force used without accountability. Between them stands a legal system bracing for challenges, a political arena sharpening its lines, and a city caught in the middle of national conflict. The question now is not only how Chicago will heal after a weekend of arrests and barricades, but how the country will reconcile security with liberty when both seem under siege. The morning after the clash, the sidewalk outside Chicago's ICE headquarters told its own story. Broken glass swept into corners. Burn marks from fireworks still etched across the pavement. A government vehicle sat on a tow truck, its tires slashed, a reminder of how quickly civil protest had turned into confrontation. Inside, the building's operations resumed, but with delays,